Welcome to Divine Justice Channel. Tensions are rising in Eastern Europe. As Ukraine leaves 10 months behind the war with Russia, both sides have to think over and over again about the moves they'll make. While the Kiev army concentrates its decisive and impressive steps on airstrike operations, Moscow continues to target Ukrainian urban infrastructures and civilian citizens in retaliation. The Ukrainian army is aware that there is not a second to lose. The prolongation of the war, on the other hand, works against Russia, especially Vladimir Putin. This week, Vladimir Putin and the Kremlin woke up like a nightmare. Sirens were sounding in many parts of Russia, and there was great uncertainty and turmoil. Long-range drone attacks that started at the dawn of Monday continued for 3 days. Russian military airfields and Russian heavy bombers, which were planned to bombard Ukraine with cruise missiles, were targeted. In the first 2 days, Russia's Engels II and Dyagilevo military airfields were attacked 3 times in total. Satellite images showed that at least 4 Russian heavy bombers were damaged as a result of the attack on Russian military airfields. The physical and psychological damage suffered by the Russian army was enormous. With the arrival of the winter season, the air temperatures had dropped considerably. In the early hours of the morning, everything seemed normal at Engels Airport, 700 kilometers from the capital, Moscow. As the sky was just starting to light up, drones began to appear at Engels Airport. Warning signals were heard from the airport and surrounding areas. Successive drones were the harbinger of disaster, but these drones were a little different than usual. These unmanned aerial vehicles headed towards Engels, unlike the others, were advancing much faster and much louder. The first explosion targeted the mentioned airport. After a great noise, a cloud of dust captured the airport. After the deafening loud noises, a second explosion followed. The drones headed for Engels were determined to leave the airport under fire and bombardment. The first satellite images of the explosions revealed the event clearly. The news of this shock explosion, which was sent to the Moscow administration via the Red Line, alarmed the Russian leader Vladimir Putin and his managers. A state of emergency was immediately declared at Engels Airport. Shared satellite images of the event revealed striking facts. Yes, just as we mentioned, there was a difference in the drones that bombarded this airport. In satellite imagery and early video footage, the drones that caused the massive explosions at Engels Airport were as fast and high-range as the Ukrainian Army's Soviet jet-powered drones. Shared satellite images almost moved social media. In the videos, it was clear that the attack was launched from a great distance. It has become much easier to deduce this from the drone's approach time to Engels Airport. Also, satellite imagery photos showed that several fighter jets were blown up by the explosions at this airport, including the Tu-22M3 backfire Russian heavy bomber and a Tu-95MS Bear H. A part of the Russian aircraft fleet was urgently moved from the runways and maintenance and repair areas to safe areas by the airport authorities, in order to be protected from possible second explosions. And the expected came true. After the heavy attacks on the first day of the incident, on the second day, Engels was again the center of the airstrikes. On the second day, this airport was attacked again by jet-powered drones. The Russian officers at the airport, who could not get over the shock of the first bombardment, were experiencing a new disaster with the start of the second attacks. A great power wanted to erase the Engels Airport from history. According to the Russian administration, this great power was the Ukrainian army. On the second day of violent explosions, Russia's casualties were quite high. The first satellite images of the explosions that took place on the second day were shared on social media, and these satellite images were the most important and shocking evidence of the tension in the region. Not since the beginning of the war had there been an event so striking and so tense. According to the first satellite images of the explosions at Engels Airport on the second day, the drones used in the attack were the same as on the first day. It was claimed that Ukraine carried out an attack on an airbase in Russia with a drone for 2 days in a row. Russian authorities blamed a Ukrainian drone strike for this morning's fire at a Russian airbase in the Kursk region in the south of the country, about 96 kilometers from the Ukrainian border. The incident came a day after explosions at 2 Russian air bases, Engels and Dyagilevo, damaged at least 2 Tu-22M3 backfire C bomber and 1 Tu-95MS Bear H. While the striking attacks in both Engels and Kursk left Russia completely helpless, An evaluation came from the U.S. administration about these operations of the Ukrainian army. In the war where tensions escalated, the Ukrainian army began to change tactics in order to make clear gains. Breakthrough in the field of unmanned aerial vehicles, the Ukrainian armed forces has greatly increased its gains in airstrike operations, as we have stated. Compared to Russia's unplanned and ineffective air attacks, the Kiev army developed its drone army with a surprise innovation. Ukraine renewed the Soviet drones in its inventory and reinforced them with jet engines. In this way, these drones, which have become much more powerful, much more effective, and have a higher range, have begun to put Russia in a very difficult situation. The Kiev army had already carried out dozens of effective drone strikes against the Russian Black Sea Fleet in Sevastopol. Since then, Russia has been quite worried about what Ukraine's drone army can do. Russia blamed the government of Kiev directly after the drone attacks on Engels, but Ukraine has neither accepted nor denied responsibility for these attacks. The biggest suspicion of the Moscow administration was that the drones used in the attacks on the Engels airport were jet-powered and could reach very high speeds. I wonder if the allegations of the Russian government were true. When did the Ukrainian army become so strong in terms of airstrikes and drones? How did Soviet jet engines provide such an effective range for the drones of the Ukrainian army? All these questions actually shed some light on the explosions that lasted for 2 days at the Engels airport. As we mentioned, Russia's claims were in favor of the Ukrainian army organizing these attacks, but Kiev still has not made a statement on this issue. While the questions left unanswered by Ukraine increased the mystery of the war much more, the events in and around the Engels airport pushed the Russian government to increase its security measures. Fears and concerns were growing that there might be another attack around this airport. Following the stunning attacks at Engels, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken reiterated his country's determination to provide Ukraine with the equipment it needs to defend itself. On this subject, Blinken said, "But the important thing is to understand what the Ukrainians are going through every day with the ongoing Russian aggression against their country, and our determination to have the equipment needed by the Kiev army, along with many of our other partners around the world. These aids are of vital importance for Ukraine to ensure itself, its citizens, and its territorial integrity." After the drone attacks at Russia's Engels airport, the number of people who think that the Moscow administration has weakened and has almost completely lost its advantage in the war has increased considerably. Retired U.S. Army Major John Spencer described the recent offensive of the Ukrainian army as a huge moment in the war, stating that the Ukrainians have proven that they have the ability to successfully attack inside Russia. Andriy Zagorodnyuk, a former Ukrainian defense minister, is another name to refer to the historic succession of Kiev troops and the decline of the Russians. Zagorodnyuk, who made quite interesting statements on this subject, said, "If someone attacks you, you will respond. You wouldn't expect this person to attack you again just because you responded. There is absolutely no strategic reason not to do this." Even all these events seem to have almost made the Russian leader give up. After the Engels attacks, Putin publicly acknowledged that the Ukraine-Russia war would be prolonged. Discussing the Ukraine-Russia war, which he described as Russia's special military operation, with the members of the Human Rights Council, Vladimir Putin announced that the war would be quite difficult. While satellite images of the drone attacks that took place at the Engels airport occupied the agenda, leader Vladimir Putin, as always, drew attention to Russia's nuclear weapons potential after great losses. The Moscow administration had been implementing this policy from the very first moment of the Ukraine-Russia war. Russia, who could not digest the historical victories of the Ukrainian army, determined such a strategy in order not to appear weak in the war and to overshadow the rise of Ukraine. But considering the recent offensive operations carried out by the Kiev army, the advantages of the war passed into the hands of Ukraine. After the Russian leader's announcement that the Ukraine war would prolong, Kommersant newspaper also published an assessment of Vladimir Putin's claims. According to the Russian newspaper, Putin threw himself into a conflict that would put the Moscow administration and Russian citizens in great danger. Kommersant thought that Vladimir Putin would not be able to get out of this war so easily. In fact, what the war brought to Russia confirmed the thesis of this newspaper. The military and financial aid that the Ukrainian army received from the U.S. administration and Western countries was now showing that it was beneficial in the long run. But the Kiev soldiers were not content with these aids. They were constantly improving themselves in air and ground operations. Therefore, in the later stages of the war, it will not be a surprise to see such striking operations by Ukraine, especially when we enter a period where tension and the margin of error will not be forgiven. This advantage of Ukraine will perhaps determine the fate of the war. Please do not forget to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications in order to be informed about new videos. Thank you for watching us.